Hi everyone, we are joined today by author and it turns out historian, Jamie Dobson.
Hello, I'm Jamie Dobson, the founder of Container Solutions and the author of the new book, Visionaries, Rebels and Machines.
And Jamie, we're going to talk about your book, we're going to talk a little bit about your history, how you came into technology, and then I'd really like to draw a line out from here as to where we think we're going next. I'll start with saying that I really enjoyed your book. It's not just that it's informative, it's that it walks a lovely line as it goes through history. And for someone like me who's been in technology I haven't done anything but tech for like 25 years, there's so many pieces that were disparate that got joined together. And the way you told that story, I thought was really, really insightful. I would love to have the information that you put into that book rattling around my head to draw on. And I think what I'll have to do is read it again. I didn't read it though. I listened to you on Audible. And I feel like I know you quite well because you have been reading to me for the past 7 hours. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. The book had to be entertaining because most people cannot cope with 300 pages of computing history. And so the trick was to try to focus on the visionaries and the rebels, the people, the characters, and what they were getting up to. And the idea was exactly that, to try to join the dots up that exist in nearly everybody's minds, but the thread that draws them together doesn't. And I think that was the purpose of the book.
So I have a young daughter. She is 9. And the book that I am reading to her at the moment, not yours, one day it'll be yours, is a history of philosophy. And it's built as a similar sort of thread.
Right.
And it has similar interest points. So, like this is someone's core idea. Here's how it led to the next one and the next one. And suddenly you've got this thread that follows through to the current day and the themes are drawn out. And we can look at it and turn it round and consider it as part of humanity. And I think your book does the same.
When we did the book launch in Waterstones, and people were saying to me, "Are you excited?" And yeah, I'm excited. I was exhausted. I've been sitting with this book for 5 years and then running a sprint from something like September until 2 weeks ago. I was sick of the book. I was a bit like a woman who's pregnant and people say, "Oh, how's it going?" There's 2 weeks to go. It's like, this baby's got to come out. So I was in work mode, making sure that things were ready, answering emails, etc., etc. But that evening when I walked into Waterstones and I saw the smart thinking section and I thought, that looks familiar, and it was my book, this was a pretty special moment. To continue the story, we ended up presenting upstairs and meeting a few customers and potential readers and doing a bit of a Q&A. And a lot of the people in the room said, this is what my kids need. They're teenage kids, they're early 20s kids. And one fella put his hand up to say, this has been fantastic. I really wish my daughter could have seen this.
You say in the book that you've written it for 3 types of people. So one is the people entering technology now, or perhaps wherever, and it feels like this, it's wherever you join technology, you can take it from there forward. So for me, it would be, virtualization and public cloud. But this goes right back. And there's a story in the book where you are surprised by what people want from history. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
I was right in the middle of the final edits and I had a reader in mind, and the reader was, I guess, somebody like me 15, 18 years ago, somebody who works in technology, and I got asked to do a talk at the DevOps meetup in London. And I was right in the middle of the research for chapter 11, the chapter about AWS and the cloud. So I said to them, well, I can throw together a talk about this easily, no problem. But then to explain, well, the cloud is a bunch of computers pushed together. It only made sense because of Moore's law and the internet. So it was impossible to explain the arrival of AWS without explaining about the internet and Moore's law. Okay, great. Did the talk. A gaggle of young people, and this was very confrontational because I consider myself to be a young person. Although somebody once said to me, inside every 40-year-old, there's a 20-year-old asking, what just happened? So there's a bunch of young people there. Let's say they're probably between 21 and 22, 23, something like that. And they were keen. They said, that was a great story. I never knew that about AWS. Obviously, I was quite chuffed about that. And they asked me, can you tell us more about the olden days? No problem. I mean, whoever says to me, can you tell us about, my kids never say to me, Dad, can you tell us about the olden days in computing? So I light up and thinking, no problem. And I start to tell them about time sharing and the Defense Department spending in the 1960s and 70s. And they say, sorry, time out. That's not the olden days we mean. I said, what do you mean? The 1990s. And I'm like, oh, seriously? And if you think about it, of course, if you're 20 or 21, that is the olden days because you were not born then.
Yeah.
And They told me that they didn't learn any of this at university. And so that evening, they'd already learned a couple of pieces of history. So I went back to the book, I revised it so that it would speak to that audience as well.
They're one cohort.
That's one cohort.
Technologists or people would-be technologists. Another is historians or people who are interested in history. How long have you been collecting these pieces of information? And was it something you intentionally did, or you just looked around and go, look, I've got all these bits I've lined up, and how did that work?
I had the story in my head for forever. I need to reject the label of historian. I'd love to be given the label of historian, but I think a real historian goes through manuscripts and goes digging in archives and interviews people. That's not me. I have built on the top of other people's work, and I acknowledge that in the acknowledgement section. I think my unique contribution is what I've done in the last 10 or 20 years, speaking to people in the industry. So certainly I was an eyewitness to what's unfolded. I think that's my unique contribution. But in my mind, I knew the story. I knew where the PC came from. I knew that, Steve Jobs and the work he'd done with Apple II. I knew where the internet came from. And one day I wanted to write this down. But I was also a little bit scared of the transistor. I knew the transistor was part of a microchip, but I didn't really know what a microchip was, and I didn't really know what a transistor was. And I'm a computer programmer. We're scared of electronics. Nobody dare admit it. So I knew there was a tiny hole, and if I finally confronted this fear of mine, I might be able to tell the story of how the computer went from Edison's workbench, at the turn of the last century, and ended up in our laps today. People ask me, how long did it take to write the book? I don't want to answer the question. It's too embarrassing. But I've been umming and ahhing about it for about 28 years. And Then I finally started to systematize the bibliography and the chunks about 5 or 6 years ago. And then only, I guess, in the last couple of years did I say, right, I'm now going to start giving up my weekends and holidays to try to batter it into shape.
And the final cohort of people you think this would be valuable to is business leaders and people involved in technology in business. Is that right?
A friend of mine asked me about the book. They will remain nameless, but they work as an investor in the space of artificial intelligence. As a matter of fact, they're the head of AI at a very famous bank. And they said to me, you need to finish this book and you need to explain what AI is. So I said, but I thought you worked in AI. They said, I don't know what I'm doing, and neither do my team, but we're all too embarrassed to admit it. Now, this shouldn't sound too strange because about 20 years ago, people didn't know how to value web businesses either, whatsoever. So these emerging technologies are very difficult for those who invent them to understand. So how does anybody outside of the technology circle have any chance? I mentioned in the opening chapter, the book was for the intelligent, curious, but not necessarily educated reader. So if you'd studied a field that wasn't computing, or you were just a curious reader, it was meant to be for a general audience. But the idea was to get them to part 5 of the book, where I could then give them advice. How do they operate in a world of AI? What should be they asking of their politicians? Those were the 3 official readers. Unofficially, loads of people, and I wasn't expecting this actually, from our community have read it and said that was brilliant. And so the threads in their minds have been tightened. And I had a lot of people say to me, I didn't know that conversational computing started not with ChatGPT, but in the 1960s at MIT. I didn't know where the word hacking came from. And so a lot of people have read that, probably recognized a lot of it, going, nodding the head, feeling quite clever. And then every now and then they got a surprise. So to win the esteem of your peers, I'll take that. I'll take that any day.
Absolutely. I would challenge anyone to read the book and then say they knew all of it, because there was a good half. I went, oh, I didn't even know that was a person,
right?
And I think actually through your research, there was a protagonist who turns up late in the book where you discovered them as well, right? So they become a key part of the story, and you can see bits they touch through the story as well. So
it's like Quicksilver, the history of computing. There's a lot of money to be made, so people like to obscure the past or keep it quiet. There are patents on the line, and it moves very quickly. So going all the way back to the time of Thomas Edison, they asked him, when did the light bulb actually occur, and when did you invent that? Nobody could remember. The pace of change was so quick, people couldn't quite put their finger on it. So on the one hand, you've got people who need the rest of us to forget history, and on the other hand, you have a situation that's moving quickly. And because a lot of advances in computing happened at Bletchley Park, all of that was under the Official Secrets Act until the 1970s. So all computing history before that moment is all about ENIAC and the work of the Americans, but actually a lot of work was done in England. So as soon as those official secrets became known, then history books start to look different. So it's very, very difficult to pin down. That's what I try to do. I try to pin the story down. I can't have fully succeeded. That's impossible. But I did my very best. And of course, some people were very annoyed at me because I skipped their favourite characters or their favourite moments in history. And all I could say was they had to be sacrificed. Details were sacrificed on the altar of narrative. And I did say sorry, but inside I was thinking, I'm not sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
Because I'd have killed the book. I'd have made it another textbook.
Yeah. No, it's all about telling the story because that's what people remember, right? This is how brains work. We can't throw too much information. For anyone who's in sales or technical sales, right. That's the key lesson is, you can remember 3 or 4 things and that's it, right? For that discussion. Yeah. The way you can get more into it is by encapsulation, by abstraction. And that's what your book does, right? It brings together these topics. You can hold on to it. You can see those themes popping up again and again through history to help you understand where they are. Well, what's your background? How did you come to have this information floating around your head?
I'm not sure. I started off life as a computer programmer. So I studied computer science and then got dropped into the world in the early noughties. And it was a funny time in computing because up until that moment, computer programmers could very easily work alone, occasionally speak to other people, and we were not necessarily forced to work in teams. And if you're going to be honest, most people are drawn to computers because they can't stand other people. And that's certainly true in my case. So anyway, I became a professional computer programmer and I still couldn't quite get my head around the fact that a few weeks earlier, I was programming for fun or as part of my studies. And a few weeks later, I was doing exactly the same thing and getting paid for it. But of course, the web arrived, web scale applications. And these were applications that didn't serve the needs of 1 or 2 users, but potentially hundreds of thousands of users simultaneously. So how those applications were designed changed. How they were hosted changed. You couldn't put them on one machine. You certainly couldn't put them on a zip disk, which is what we used to do, and hand them over to somebody. So the world of computing changed, and all of a sudden, you needed genuinely multidisciplinary teams, a database person, a designer, somebody who understood user experience, which screen and it should follow which. And actually, because everything was in HTML, all of a sudden this was a new user interface. And actually they were not as good as the previous visual basic interfaces that people might have gotten used to. So that's how I was plunged into the world of web scale development. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it because when I was on my machine and I had an idea, I coded it, I ran my tests, and I got instant feedback. And when we were building web scale applications, we had to package up our software, give it to somebody who may or may not deploy it to a lifelike server. And we may or may not get feedback in the next 3-4 working days, but sometimes it was 3-4 weeks.
Big loops.
Yeah. Huge loops. So what are you supposed to do for the next 4 weeks? And so that's how I started. And then after a period of depression, everybody had this. Everyone was like, oh my God, I can't stand this. We went from Java to XML. We went from programming to configuring systems. We started to fight back. Continuous delivery was a piece of software that helped you to build and bring together your different units. Automated testing became quite a big thing. So we started to look at how to make the process of deploying this software to these big pieces of kit easier. We were not the only people looking at that because over in Seattle, Amazon were doing the same. So Jeff Bezos and his team were as annoyed as we were. And in their case, it wasn't existential, but the quicker they could turn features around, the quicker they could make their users happy. And Amazon was growing. Right across the community, at exactly the same time, people started to work out, how can we make this easier? Programmable infrastructure arose from that. Imagine if we could ask for a Java machine or a machine with so much CPU and Java installed on it just by coding it in a continuous delivery script. So from that frustration came these ideas that would eventually become cloud computing as we all know it. And on the back of that, Container Solutions was born. And Container Solutions was the company I founded that is really extreme programming plus the cloud. So we were more developer-y than we were infrastructure-y. And this is going to sound terrible. I'm terrible at infrastructure. I have people at Container Solutions who do that work. I've never worked with infrastructure. I learned how to work as a team with infrastructure engineers, but I'm all fingers and thumbs when it comes to the actual hardware. I don't really understand virtualization. In a way, Container Solutions was the ultimate DevOps company, but I was the dev part of the equation, and the other founder was more the ops side of the equation.
Right.
So that's how I got into it. And then the story of the book, of the Visionaries and Rebels, that was just always lingering in the background. From university, we knew about the first 10 steps. And then obviously, chapters 10, 11, and 12 follow my career one-to-one. We talk about the arrival of the web, the arrival of the cloud, arrival of software as a service. This is my eyewitness testimony. So I'm not a historian, but I was definitely there. And then, of course, as the book unfolds, we find that we're in AI before we get to the very end, where it's speculation. Things are moving so quickly that everything about artificial intelligence is a mixture of speculation. Sometimes it's reporting. You might have speculated about it this year and next year it becomes real. So, it's reportage, speculation, and it's nearly always out of date and almost always wrong. We don't know right now. And that's where the book ends.
I consider myself an enthusiast in this social side of computing. Psychological safety, of course, very important. You introduced an idea I hadn't heard of, which is to be learning driven.
You're thinking of learning versus performance-oriented individuals. It's a very technical term and it's a effing mouthful. And recording the audiobook was challenging. So one of my goals of the book, it was not the central goal, but there were two men called Locke and Latham. And they developed something called goal-setting theory. And it's the most coherent, sensible theory that explains not only what happens in the workplace, but in our lives. How these people are not center stage, how their books are not like on the desk of every executive in the world is beyond me. I want people to learn goal-setting theory. A part of their work is to divide us people, into performance and learning goal-oriented people. Learning goal-oriented people, they don't necessarily like feedback, but they can deal with it better than performance goal-oriented people. And that's probably the difference.
So which one are you?
You know what? Nobody will ever answer that question honestly. I think I'm probably more learning goal-oriented. I think history shows that. And a learning goal-oriented person cares more about producing an awesome artifact than they do looking good. A performance goal-oriented person, if they've made a mistake, will probably not want to speak about it. And this can be a nightmare because you can't build computer systems without making mistakes. So if you put a bunch of performance-oriented I told you it was a mouthful. Performance goal-oriented people together, you're gonna have, it's gonna be quite a macho setup. And you're not gonna move your work forward because systems move forward through failure. So I think history shows that I'm probably more learning goal-oriented than performance goal, but I am competitive. So there is a part that, some of those characteristics I recognize. And then at Container Solutions, I was 50% in building systems, in which case it was all about feedback. And then the other 50%, I was out selling stuff. And it's all about, well, we don't have time to feel sorry for ourselves. We've got to go and do what we need to do. So I recognize myself in both of them. I think it'd be quite interesting to ask what do other people think, because sometimes people have a different opinion of you than you have of yourself.
Yeah, some objectivity there. I think if you look back to Freud's work, not everyone likes Freud's dichotomy. Myers-Briggs is sort of built on that and Jung's work, but that was a mother and daughter, not really psychologists, right?
Right.
Myers-Briggs. The Big Five is a more rigorously applied version of personality profiles. It's one psychologists refer to and has reproducibility over the lifetime of people being studied. But they define, I believe, we'll see if I get this right, extroversion and introversion as a flow of energy. So someone who is extroverted might get energy from being in a social situation. Someone who's introverted would expel energy. They'd lose energy from being in a social situation that they're maybe not very familiar with. And I wondered if being learning orientated has some sort of similar acid test. And speaking of acid test, there is actually an acid test. I don't know if this is where the term acid test comes from, but if you put lemon juice on a bit of paper and then put it in the mouth of someone, the amount of saliva they produce, and sorry if this is putting you off your lunch, indicates whether they are an extrovert or an introvert.
Is that right? That's an interesting one. I'm not sure what's the relationship between introverts, extroverts, and the learning goal oriented.
Oh, yeah.
People can slag Freud off all they like. So first of all, he wasn't a psychiatrist or a psychologist. He was a physician, and he was drawn to the work of people who seem to be sick but have no physical symptoms. So therefore he thought, well, there might be something wrong with the mind, with the brain. But Freud was, without a doubt, the first person to connect our behaviour as adults based on what happened to us in childhood. Remarkably, that was hardly talked about at all. So that, I think, is Freud's main contribution. I think you need extroverts and introverts on projects. I think they work differently. Many people assume that I'm an extrovert because I'm pretty comfortable in settings like this with you, but I get all of my energy from being alone. I wasn't particularly happy to come out today to see you. I was like, oh, it's a work thing. It's a work thing. I've got to do it. So I don't drive. I don't take energy from being with other people, but I do like being with other people, but kind of on my own terms, if you know what I mean. And I think as a manager, and you see that all the way through the history of technology, from Edison to Robert Oppenheimer's work with the bomb in the deserts of New Mexico, these people were great managers. And a great manager will know when to sort of step in, give people some personal time, or create a setup where their introverts can recharge and where their extroverts can sort of express themselves. And certainly my life as a manager was all about helping manage other people's energy. I can't teach people much about programming. They know what they're doing and they know how to try and to test and to learn. But what I can do as a manager is make sure people are motivated, the goals are correct, and much more importantly, the environment's right. People don't talk about the environment, but the way the chairs are laid out, access to the coffee, whiteboards, all of this is vitally important. The learning goal oriented people get everything, all their motivation comes from doing the job. You want to upset them, demotivate them, put an obstacle in the way. So if you understand that dichotomy, performance versus learning, then you understand that bureaucracy and hierarchy need to be minimized, because to get the best out of those people, you need to let them get on with their work. So management for techies is not about footballs. It's not about Friday drinks. As I said earlier, as an introvert, Friday drinks was just a source of pain for me. So as a manager, and I think that's the book does that really well, is it says, listen, you don't need to believe me. I'm telling you what my experiences as a manager are. But by the way, it worked for Edison, it worked for Oppenheimer, it worked for Bob Taylor, it worked for Bezos, and it worked for Hastings at Netflix, and it worked for me. Technologies have changed, but human nature does not change. And that's why those rules still hold.
Yeah, fantastic. If you're looking for further guidance on working with people who maybe are not, maybe you're an extrovert and you're looking for how to cater for those parts of your team, then there's a good book called Quiet you might enjoy, which will flash up as well.
Quiet.
Yeah.
Yes. The problem is a lot of managers and management is tailored towards extroverts.
Yeah. They're like me, they talk too much. Although I consider myself an ambivert, to just break the dichotomy. Right?
Well, is there such thing as an ambivert?
Well, you can break any scale into 3, can't you? So in that you would fall either side of it. And probably we see that as well. I think one of the problems we have as humans is we want a simple answer to a complicated system. And that's where we get into all sorts of problems. But
we can't help it. We're terrible humans. It reminds me of the Neil Young song, the album On the Beach. Brilliant album, by the way. I need a crowd of people, but I can't face them every day.
Nice.
That's a great lyric. And I think most of us are like that. And then the other thing about my introversion is maybe I need my colleagues less, because in the last 10 years, my family grew. So I've got too many kids. So I'm like, so it's not just, so the book, in a way, the book actually started as a way to maintain some sanity. It was an awful period during COVID. So stress at work, we faced an unprecedented crisis. And that had knock-on effects to our financial situation as a business. I was in the middle of a huge negotiation with one of our customers. It was stressful. And I was working 60, 70 hours a week, I think, at that point, with not a single moment to reflect and to read and to be creative. And then one Saturday morning, because I had to wake up pretty early, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. So I was up on Saturday morning about 4 or 5 o'clock, but there was no work to do, no emails to attend to. So I started to write, and I started with Edison. And then I started to think, shall I do it? Shall I? Then after Edison came Alexander Graham Bell. So I was reading. It was only 2 hours a week to begin with, just reading, typing notes up. But I did it because I had no creative outlet whatsoever. At work, it was a crisis. After work and on the weekends, it was looking after 2 young babies because I had twins, with not a single moment for myself. So I did 2 things. I started to run. I've never ran before, quite liked it, but it was all before the family woke up. And then to connect to a higher purpose, I started reading about big things, Edison, Oppenheimer. And once I started, I couldn't stop. And it got momentum. Then I had structure. Then I thought, well, if I just fill that in, I'd have a chapter. And at one point I thought, right, I'm going for this now. And then when I changed my position at Container Solutions, I stood back as the chief executive. 10 years was enough. The new person came in, James, he's doing a fantastic job. And I thought, right, I'm going, I'm off, I'm going. And I started, I thought, right, this is getting finished now.
Fantastic.
And that was the story. And I did it for my sanity more than anything.
So your creative outlet, you've got, you've published this book, you're currently promoting it. Where does that need to share, where does that need to create take you from here?
I am messing about. Oh, I thought it was such a good idea 3 weeks ago. Now I'm starting to regret it because the rubber has hit the road. You probably, well, you won't remember because you weren't born, but you might remember your parents talking about it. So my mum loves to tell me about the summer of 1976 because there was a heat wave and she was pregnant with me. But my stepdad always goes on about this show that Orson Welles did in the United States. And he did a radio play of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, about the Martians landing and taking over.
Yep.
But, Orson Welles had this amazing voice. And many listeners thought it was a news broadcast. And they started to panic and they started to flee the cities or stockpile food. So I had an idea that I would do a single narrator, War of the Worlds, BBC 1950s, Visionaries, Rebels and Machines.
Right.
And I'm doing my own voices and I've got a number of friends work as voice actors doing the female voices. So I needed to rope in my American friend for Samuel Morse's mum. And on the one hand, it's really interesting and I'm creating again, but I just assumed I'd make a few notes, record the podcast and would be away. But actually, it's creatively, it's taken up quite a lot of juice. So just when my wife got me back on Saturday mornings, I'm now trying to write my script on Saturday morning. So that's one outlet. The slight difference with this one is I am including clear leadership lessons. So really, I'm talking about Samuel Morse, I'm talking about Frankenstein in the early podcasts, but then I say to the listener, right, now let's just take a time out. Let's break the fourth wall, as we've just been discussing here in the studio. Because what does this mean if you're a leader? So if you're a leader right now, you're either trying to succeed with the cloud or you're curious what comes next for generative AI. This is the theme of this podcast. So yes, it's tongue-in-cheek. Yes, it's all history and storytelling. But then I remind the listener, right, listen, we're here for a reason and this is it. So that's one area of creativity I'm presently exploring.
So there's a good amount of your piece that focuses on the current day. And we said, this is 6 months ago, you put your keyboard away. A lot of that talks about AI, the opportunities, the risks. And I think it's really interesting that you even go sort of the economics and we get this idea of jobless recoveries, and we're going to see a lot more of those. As we draw a thread out into AI, I see there being a generative control ability of this to create things, to take control of things. And we're seeing this in things like call centers where an AI could answer the phone, it can get you so far. But all of these systems today, they're working with the assumption that someone is able to look after them. There's some shepherding that goes on in these systems. And if we look at the challenges Apple have been having with Siri, Apple announced that they were going to put Siri in a GPT, an LLM, generative AI model into Siri, and they've backed off it. Now, they've backed off it because, as far as I understand, and do jump in the comments if you know more than I do, because it's unreliable, because there's a high expectation of quality, but the system itself is not able to deliver that. Now, as we look at the area that we've come from, which is technology, DevOps, moving an idea from, someone's thought of something to put and then getting it out to the user where it's useful, that process requires a lot of rigor. It requires a lot of diligence, and it requires a lot of systems. And I don't see that AI is going to be able to pull all those things together in a way that's structured enough for someone to fix it if it goes wrong, or to understand it if it's not put together in a form that someone operating it has. So I see the AI piece, the generative AI piece, as a revolution, and we might get to the point where that revolution can take care of it all. But in technology terms, we're looking at a continued evolution, and that continued evolution levels up the pieces that we have today to become a further abstraction. And we talked about public cloud earlier. There was a move from the API mandate, very important, right? API mandate was the bit where Jeff Bezos says, everything you do must be available to us as an API. And this allowed people to build systems on top of systems on top of systems. And each one of those has a contract, and each one of those knows what to expect. It can be monitored, it can be iterated, and it can be deployed in the same way for everything. And we're going to see similar paradigms where we move up the levels of abstraction, and we might use AI to develop those pieces, but there's still going to be an architect in there. There's still going to be someone overseeing all those changes. So I wondered where you see evolutionary technology moving, maybe helped by AI, particularly in the container space, in the Kubernetes space, in the IT operations and programming space as we look forward.
In the API memo, he also ended that by saying, and if you don't do this, you're going to be fired. He wasn't joking. It wasn't a joke. And so I guess when you're the major shareholder and the chief exec of a company, you can say things like that. But it worked. Yeah. It got everybody at Amazon, using the API. I think whatever comes next is speculative from us. But I think one of the history lessons that is relevant here is, if you remember, well, you won't remember, but you've obviously seen the films Apollo 13 and all of that. The space shuttle missions was a three-way collaboration between the onboard computers, the people in the rocket and the capsule, and the command center back in Houston. And so in a way, it wasn't the human versus the computer. It was in a collaborative, cycle. The guys in the rocket would get a number, and they'd say to Houston, we're getting this number from the machine. Can you corroborate that, please? And then they would say yes or no. They would even sometimes run simulations back on the ground to double check the work of what was going up in space. In a way, that reminds me a bit like the operations teams that we've got currently. They are making sure businesses keep running in exactly the same way that Houston or the command center made sure that space mission kept running. So I do not see an area where you would take the creativity of humans out of the loop. I think that would be very dangerous. The whole point of human-computer interface in the beginning was because people were worried that a bad program or Dickey Electronics would accidentally start World War III. Well, that is still a serious concern. So if you hand over all control to a machine, and of course IBM famously had a rule, a computer cannot make a decision because a computer cannot be held to account. This is about sociology. It's about the boundaries between society and technology, what's known as socio-technology. Mm-hmm. So I see interesting models emerge. What does that mean in terms of Kubernetes and tools like that? Well, maybe the computer part of the equation becomes a bit more like HAL in 2001 Space Odyssey. You talk to it. It's more conversational. You work collaboratively. The astronauts in that film said, hey, HAL, what about this? And what about that? Now, of course, he turns out to be a naughty AI and ends up trying to kill the astronauts to save himself because he becomes conscious. But the point I'm trying to make is there is still a collaboration between man and machine and a control center. So I think tasks will get easier. Certainly systems will get a lot better. There is one system I've been talking quite a bit about. It's a system, I think it's scanned fetal. I need to check this. But essentially it's a handheld scanning device that can check a baby while it's still in the womb, check for biomarkers, check for any problems that might need medical attention. It only takes an hour to learn how to use the system. And behind it is an artificial neural network that's been trained on tons of scans of the past. It's easy to use, it's cheap to deploy, and requires hardly any training to do it. This is a great use case. So, of course, the researchers and scientists have developed artificial neural networks, and then this company has said, okay, we're going to find a use case for it. Now, I suppose the question is, what happens if the machine is occasionally wrong? Well, I suppose if it was wrong once in 1,000 times, the one case where there was any suspicions would be where you'd bring in an experienced a doctor who looks after babies.
Monitoring
cases. So I see, on the one hand, specific use cases like the fetal scanner, and in our world, I see more collaborative relationship between the machine and the humans. And you might be sat there thinking, is this guy serious? Is he really serious? Well, actually, my friend Ian at Container Solutions, Ian Mile, he always says to me, I don't use what ChatGPT tells me. I don't even take the code or the copy or the work. But if I'm stuck and I just dump something in there and I ask it, what is the solution to this problem? Or what's the next step? It gives me an answer that unlocks my creativity. This is a classic example of, the conversational nature of these systems and how it unlocks something, not in the machine, but in the human. So if Ian is having this collaborative experience right now, then why wouldn't some sort of collaborative and conversational relationship emerge in the future? But I do think it means cloud computing as we know it is going to change dramatically.
I like the idea of a digital muse. Do you think that the API mandate is met by most organizations, or is that still an aspirational piece, and that's where things like developer platforms are going to come in?
I think the API mandate is definitely not met by hardly any companies. You'd be surprised that many, many companies are not even on the cloud. And we work in cloud computing, so we assume everybody's doing it. Not everybody's doing it. Continuous delivery is hardly done in any organizations. A lot of businesses, and this is where quite naughty salespeople are doing quite well, the businesses that are struggling the most are the ones that are susceptible to the AI snake oil salesman. So they're hoping they can jump their technical evolution. Everything's a mess. Forget about the cloud. Forget about continuous integration. Forget about developing a software development capability. Boom, we'll just move straight to AI. You've got zero chance of succeeding with that. The API question is important, like the continuous delivery question is important, because it shows that you have a company that are taking the development of technology seriously. They will learn how to use AI. They won't fall for the snake oil salespeople, and they'll start to test and learn and figure out the use cases. And it goes all the way back to what we talked about Edison and Oppenheimer. For that, you need psychological safety. So only the most mature companies will really succeed. But again, that is also speculative. The other thing that might happen, in fact, no, not might, it almost is certainly going to happen. There will be really good companies out there who actually don't look at AI because they're doing well financially. And they're like, lots of good companies hesitated with web scale applications, and they hesitated with cloud, and they paid a price. So there'll be a strange subset of companies that are quite good at what they do, are successful, and possibly a bit complacent right now. So that's a prediction I would I bet £10 on.
Well, if you're looking at moving into an API-focused space, Kubermatic do have a Kubermatic development platform that might be able to help with that. Do get in touch if you'd like to discuss that. But for today, I'd like to really thank you. I'd like to thank you first for your book. I'd like to thank you for your time today and sharing your story with the audience. So it's been great.
Thank you.
Take care.